The rain had been going since noon, and by the time the rest of the office emptied out, it had settled into that particular steady rhythm that makes you feel like the world outside ceased to exist. Just you, the glow of a desk lamp, the smell of ink and old paper, and the ghost of someone's takeout curry 3 cubicles over. I liked the office this way, hollow and quiet, the kind of quiet that lets you actually think. I was the last one in, which was nothing new. I was almost always the last one in. Being a divorce lawyer means you learn to sit with other people's heartbreak as if it were furniture. You arrange it around you, note the sharp edges, work around them. Over the years, I had become very good at not feeling too much about the files on my desk. They were documents, evidence of endings. My job was to sort them, process them, file them with the court, and protect my clients from the worst of what endings can do to a person. I had learned to be clean about it. Clinical, even. My name is Santos Tyler. I am 31 years old. I hold a law degree, a lease on a third-floor apartment with water pressure issues, and a professional reputation that people in this city have come to associate with competence, discretion, and a kind of steady calm that omega lawyers in alpha-majority firms have to work twice as hard to build and 3 times as hard to maintain. I was good at my job. I want to say that plainly, without apology, because what happened that Friday evening had nothing to do with competence and everything to do with the particular cruelty of irony. The stack of new intake files had been sitting on the corner of my desk since 3 in the afternoon, when Mara, our paralegal, had dropped them with her usual cheerful efficiency and said, "All yours, Santos. Friday pile. Lucky you." She'd winked. I'd smiled. And then I proceeded to forget about them entirely while finishing a court brief for the Harrington custody dispute. By 7, the brief was done, the rain was steady, and I had nothing but time and a cold cup of coffee between me and the intake stack. The first 3 files were routine, a couple separating after 9 years, citing irreconcilable differences, the kindest legal phrase ever invented, because it meant everything and nothing all at once. A business partnership dissolution masquerading as a marriage dissolution. A case involving a contested property in a town 3 hours north that I would probably refer out. Ordinary. Manageable. The 4th file stopped me. It did not stop me dramatically. There was no gasp, no sudden intake of breath, no moment of theatrical realization. It stopped me the way a step stops you when you expect a landing and find open air instead. A small, lurching wrongness, almost mechanical, before the full weight of understanding could catch up. The name on the tab read, Kern, J. Tyers, Petition for Dissolution of Bond. I looked at it for a very long time. The ink was blue, the handwriting on the label was Mara's neat print. The file number was stamped in the upper right corner, the same as every other file in that stack. Everything about it was ordinary except for the fact that the 2 names on that tab were mine and the man I had married 14 months ago, and I had not known until this exact moment. Sitting alone in a rain-soaked office with a cold cup of coffee going tepid beside me, that Jackie had actually done it. That he had actually filed. I had told myself for 3 weeks that he wouldn't, that the conversation we'd had, the one that had shattered every quiet thing between us, had been anger talking. That Jackie Kern, alpha architect, the man who once drove 4 hours in a thunderstorm because I'd mentioned offhand that I was homesick, the man who had pressed his face into my hair on our first morning together and said, "I am not a patient person, but I would wait all my lives for you," that this man would not actually walk into a lawyer's office and file dissolution paperwork. And yet, here it was, tab-labeled, stamped, assigned by whatever humor the universe possesses, to me. I set the file flat on my desk. I looked at the window, at the rain drawing silver lines down the glass. I breathed, and then, because the job does not pause for personal catastrophes, I opened it. That was when the nausea hit. It arrived without warning, the way the worst things always do. A rising tide at the base of my throat. A cold sweat prickling at my temples, a sudden, violent revolt of my entire body against the idea of sitting upright. I pushed back from my desk fast enough that my chair caught on a groove in the floor and spun me slightly sideways. And I pressed both palms flat against the desktop and breathed through my nose the way you do when you're telling your body very firmly that this is not the time. It listened. Barely. The nausea receded to a low, insistent hum. I sat very still. Outside, the rain intensified for a moment, drumming against the glass and then eased back into its rhythm. I thought. Food. I hadn't eaten since 11. A sad desk sandwich I'd barely tasted. My body was protesting. That was all. Except I was 31 days past the last date I had marked in the calendar app on my phone, and I had been telling myself for 2.5 weeks that it was stress, because I had been under considerable stress, because my marriage was imploding and I'd not slept properly since the night Jackie and I had stood in our kitchen at 2 in the morning and said things to each other that neither of us had ever said aloud before. Things that had been building for so long that when they finally came out they were less like words and more like the sudden collapse of a wall that had been silently cracking for years. Stress, I had told myself. Omega cycles disrupted by stress all the time. But 31 days is not stress. 31 days is something else entirely. I sat with that knowledge for a long, strange, suspended moment. The lamp hummed. The rain fell. Somewhere in the building, a door closed. And I, Santos Tyler, Omega divorce lawyer, sat in front of the dissolution paperwork for my own marriage and thought, oh no. I need to tell you about Jackie Kern because none of the rest of this makes sense without him. He came into my office on a bright morning the previous spring, my first spring at Alcott and Mercer, the firm where I'd landed after 2 years clerking and 1 brutal year at a firm where being an Omega who hadn't bonded yet was treated as either a liability or an opportunity depending on which partner you drew on any given day. Alcott and Mercer was different. Quieter, more careful, and my client list when I joined was mostly referrals from a colleague who specialized in amicable separations, which meant most of the people who sat across from my desk were not angry, just sad, just tired, just done. Jackie was angry, not loudly, not the way some alpha clients could be, filling a room with heat and static and the kind of dominance that makes your Omega biology want to press flat and quiet. No, Jackie's anger was the contained kind, the kind that has been compressed by discipline until it looks like stillness, until the only tells are the set of the jaw and the particular steadiness of eyes that are working very hard at not betraying anything. He was tall. He had the kind of face that belonged in black and white photographs, all strong lines and contrast, dark eyes, a mouth that was currently pressed into something that was not quite a frown, but was not far from one either. His scent when he came through the door was cedar and iron, the scent of an alpha and controlled the stress, and I noted it the way I'd learned to note such things professionally. Filed it, set it aside, did not let it touch me. "Mr. Kern," I said, standing to shake his hand. "Santos Tyler, please sit down." He sat. He looked around the office, not with the judgmental sweep of someone cataloging shortcomings, but with the particular look of a person who processes environments architecturally, noting space and light in proportion before settling into them. Later I would learn that this was simply how he moved through the world. He was an architect. Everything was spatial to him. "You look younger than I expected," he said. It was not an insult, just an observation. "I get that sometimes," I said, and sat down and opened his file. "You're here because your marriage to a Dawson Purse has reached the point of dissolution. You've been separated for 8 months. Correct?" "Yes, and the primary points of contention are property, specifically the family home and the architectural firm you co-own with a third party, Meridian Design. The firm is mine," he said, and the flatness of it was the most emotion he'd shown in the first 60 seconds. "Dawson's name is on the partnership because I added it during our 3rd year. At the time I thought," he stopped. "Redirected. The firm is mine. I built it from scratch. I need to know how to protect it." "That's what I'm here for," I said. We worked through it. The meeting ran long, nearly 90 minutes, because Jackie Kern, I discovered, was the kind of man who had done his research, who asked precise questions and listened to the answers with complete attention, and who, when he didn't understand something, said so without embarrassment. He had clearly done his homework on divorce law and had come prepared enough that I spent half the meeting expanding on nuances rather than covering basics. By the time he stood to leave, something had shifted. Not dramatically, not even noticeably, except to me in the very private interior place where I kept the things I did not let affect my professional demeanor. Something had shifted the way a window shifts when the day's temperature changes. Small, structural, quiet. "You're good at this," he said at the door. "Thank you. I don't mean the law part." He looked at me directly. "I mean the explaining part. Most lawyers make you feel like you're being tolerated when you ask questions. You don't. I held his gaze. Questions are how people protect themselves. It's my job to encourage them, not resent them. He nodded, once, slow, and then he left, and I stood there in the doorway of my office for a moment before I went back to my desk and wrote my case notes and told myself with great firmness that my client's cedar and iron scent was not something I intended to think about after business hours. I thought about it after business hours. He came back 3 more times over the following 6 weeks. Each time, the business between us was legitimate, necessary, documented. And each time, I noticed small things about him. The way he always arrived exactly on time, not early, not late, with a precision that spoke of respect for other people's hours. The way he brought coffee once, without asking, and set it on the desk in front of me and said, "You looked tired last time." I guessed at the order, and it was exactly right, which meant he had paid attention. The way his anger gradually, almost invisibly, became something quieter as the case progressed, as the shape of what he was losing became clearer, and the shape of what he was keeping became clearer too. The dissolution of his marriage to Dawson Pierce was finalized on a Thursday morning. Jackie Kern came to the office to sign the final paperwork, and I walked him through it with the same care I'd given every meeting before, and when it was done and the file was closed, he sat there for a moment with his hands folded on the table and said nothing. "This part is always strange," I said. "Even when it's the right thing, even when it's been a long time coming. I keep thinking I should feel something cleaner," he said. "You will. It takes time to catch up to itself." He looked at me across the desk. "Have you ever been through one, personally?" It was outside the boundaries of professional distance. I answered anyway. "No. But I've been close enough to understand that the legal end and the emotional end are rarely on the same calendar." Something moved in his face. Softened, maybe. "I want to take you to dinner," he said. Not as a thank you, as an ask. Every professional and practical instinct I possessed lined up neatly and said, "No, the case is closed, but the professional boundary exists for a reason." I had worked hard to build a reputation as someone whose clients were clients, not social connections, not entanglements. "Your case just closed," I said. "I know. That means you're not my client anymore." The corner of his mouth moved. "I know that too." The silence between us held for one long breath, and then I said, "Friday, 7 o'clock. He smiled then. The first real one I'd seen from him, and it undid something in my chest, swift and irreversible, the way the first warm day of spring undoes the certainty of winter. "Friday," he said. 7. We were not a fast story. I want to be clear about that. Jackie and I moved carefully, like people who have learned, each in our own ways, in our own separate histories, that rushing is how you break things that might have been beautiful. Our first dinner was long and unhurried at a small restaurant that served food that tasted like someone's grandmother had made it, and we talked for 3 hours about things that were not law and not architecture. And I discovered that he had read widely and thought carefully, and was one of those rare people who changes their mind when given sufficient reason without experiencing it as a defeat. He also, I discovered, knew I was an omega. This is the part of my life that I navigate carefully, always. The professional world is better than it used to be. There are protections, there are norms, there are firms like Alcott and Mercer that have put genuine effort into not treating secondary biology as a disqualifier. But being an omega who presents as professionally as I do, who has never let a heat cycle interfere with a filing deadline, who has spent years cultivating the reputation of someone whose status is simply one unremarkable fact among many. This is a thing I maintain by being very deliberate. I do not volunteer it. I do not hide it. I simply do not lead with it, and most people in a professional context do not ask. Jackie asked. On our third dinner, quietly, without making it an event, he said, "I noticed your suppressants in your bag when you were looking for your pen last week. I'm not asking to pry. I'm asking because I want us to start without me pretending I didn't notice." I looked at him across the table. And nothing. I just wanted to say it out loud so it wasn't the thing neither of us mentioned. I set down my fork. "Do you have opinions about it?" "I have opinions about most things," he said, "but not about that. My sister is an omega. My best friend from university is an omega. I've watched them navigate rooms that weren't built for them their entire lives, and I have exactly the opinions you'd expect me to have about the people who make those rooms harder." I picked my fork back up. Okay, I said. Okay, I'm an omega, and now we can stop talking about it as though it's a thing that needs to be resolved. He laughed, a real laugh from the chest with warmth in it, and I felt it somewhere behind my sternum, warm and spreading the way good tea feels on a cold morning. We kept seeing each other. Dinners became walks, became Saturday mornings, became the natural, unplanned accumulation of a person's presence in your life until their absence becomes noticeable, then significant, then something you can't imagine anymore. His scent became familiar to me, cedar and iron and something underneath that was specifically his. A warmth that was not generic alpha but uniquely Jackie, layered and complex and particular to the man who would send me photographs of buildings he found interesting at odd hours of the night with no caption. Who left a book on my coffee table once without comment. Who argued with me about municipal planning with genuine passion and then agreed that I had made good points. Who held my hand in his car on the way home from his firm's annual event and said nothing for 20 minutes because he understood that some silences are company, not absence. I am falling in love with you, he said on a Sunday in autumn while we were making coffee in my kitchen. He was not looking at me. He was watching the coffee drip into the pot. I thought you should know. I'm not asking you to do anything with that. I just think you're owed the information. I leaned against the counter. You're terrible at casual declarations. I'm not trying for casual. He looked at me then. I'm trying for honest. My chest was very full. I said, I know. I've been falling too. He crossed the kitchen and kissed me for the first time, and I want to tell you it was perfect and elegant and cinematic. But the truth is it was also slightly awkward because neither of us had telegraphed it quite enough, and our noses bumped first and then we both laughed. And then it became the kind of kiss that is better than perfect because it is real, warm and careful and deepening slowly, his hands on my face like I was something worth being precise about. The bond came 6 months later, when I had been certain of him long enough that the certainty felt structural, load-bearing, the kind you build on. We were not impulsive about it. We talked about it at length, the way people who have been careful about things talk about them, fully, seriously, with honesty about what it meant and what it would change and what it would require. Jackie said that he did not want me to feel that his alpha instincts were pushing the timeline, that he would wait as long as I needed. That this decision was mine in a way it had never fully been his to make. I said, I've made it. I'm sure. We married in a small ceremony with close people only. No grand productions. Jackie wore charcoal gray. I wore deep blue. My colleague and friend Elaine cried more than either of us did, which she brought up for months afterward with enormous indignation. Jackie's sister, Renata the Omega, who had taught him what he knew about navigating rooms not built for you, hugged me for a very long time and whispered in my ear, he's been looking for a person like you his whole life. Don't let him forget how to be soft. I promised her I wouldn't. 14 months later, I was sitting in front of our dissolution paperwork trying not to be sick. To understand how we got from that afternoon in the kitchen to a blue-tabbed file on my desk, I have to tell you about the 6 months before the end. Which is to say, I have to tell you about the Callaway project and the suppressants and the conversation I'd had with my physician, and the thing I had decided by myself without telling Jackie because I had told myself it was not yet a decision worth sharing. Jackie's firm, Meridian Design, the firm he had protected so fiercely in his own divorce, had won a major commission, a whole development, mixed use, ambitious, the kind of project that comes once or twice in a career and either defines you or destroys you depending on how you handle it. He was the lead on it, working with a team of 4, putting in the kind of hours that eat mornings and evenings alike and leave a person wrung out by the time they make it home. I understood this. I am not someone who requires constant presence. I have my own demanding hours, my own files that sometimes swallow weeks. We had always been good at being 2 people with full lives who chose, deliberately, to build something together inside those lives. But there is a difference between being independently busy and being absent. And somewhere in the 5th month of the Callaway project, Jackie drifted past busy and into absent in a way that had a different quality, a different temperature. He was home, physically. He was in the apartment, eating dinner, sleeping beside me. But there was a layer of glass between us that I could not quite find the edge of, and I could not tell. This is the part that kept me up at night, whether it was the project or whether it was something else. Whether I had done something, misread something, Let something erode that I hadn't noticed eroding. I did not ask. This is the failure I need to own. I am, by profession, a person who asks questions. But in my own life, in my own marriage, I had a habit, old, deeply grooved, of not asking the questions whose answers I was afraid of. At the same time, I was dealing with something of my own that I had not yet said aloud to anyone, including my husband. My physician had, at my 6-month bonded omega check, mentioned that my suppressant prescription was one she'd want to discuss. Not because anything was wrong, but because of a flag in my blood work, an endocrine marker that suggested my system might be moving in a direction that would, in the medium term, reduce the effectiveness of long-term suppression therapy. She hadn't said anything alarming. She'd said it was a conversation for when I was ready. The conversation she was gesturing toward was one about whether I wanted children. This is not a simple question for anyone. For an omega who had spent his adult life carefully managing his biology in the context of a demanding professional career, it was a question with many sub-questions branching off it, each with their own weight. I had never believed I didn't want them. I simply had never found the space in my life for that decision to feel like a real one rather than a hypothetical. And then I had bonded with Jackie, and the question had become real, and I had been sitting with it privately for 2 months, turning it over, trying to find the shape of the answer. I should have talked to Jackie. I should have sat him down and said, "Here is where my head is, here is what my doctor said, here is the question I'm holding, and I would like to hold it with you." I didn't. I held it alone, and I waited for the right moment. And the right moment kept not arriving because Jackie was deep inside the Callaway project, and every time I looked at him in the evenings I saw how tired he was, how stretched, and I told myself, not now. Later. The explosion, when it came, was not about any of these things directly. The explosion was about a Friday night dinner. His firm partner, a woman named Inez, had hosted a gathering. Colleagues and clients, architects and developers. Jackie had mentioned it weeks in advance. I'd had it in my calendar. And then I'd had a case take a catastrophic turn. An opposing attorney had filed a motion that blew up my timeline, and I'd worked until 8:30 and arrived at the gathering an hour and a half late. Still in work clothes, carrying the specific anxiety of someone who has been deep in crisis management and cannot yet fully surface. I was not good company that night. I knew it while it was happening and could not stop it. The distraction of my mind still running on professional tracks, the social performance that required an energy I didn't have, the way I could feel myself failing at the warmth and presence that the evening seemed to want from me. On the drive home, Jackie was quiet. A different quiet from his usual thoughtful silences. This was a compressed quiet, a loaded one. "You were somewhere else all evening," he said, not looking away from the road. "I know. I'm sorry. The Harrington case. It's not just tonight, Santos." I looked at him. "You've been somewhere else for months," he said. "I come home, and you're there, and you're not there. Something is going on with you, and you're not telling me, and I—" He stopped, controlled something. "I don't know how to reach you right now." The unfairness of it hit me like cold water because I had been thinking the same thing about him, that he had been unreachable, that the Callaway project had built a glass wall between us, and to have it turned and aimed at me was something I was not prepared for. "You want to talk about reaching," I said, and I heard the edge in my voice and could not modulate it in time. "For 5 months I've watched you come home and go to your desk or go directly to sleep, and I have given you space because I understood the project was demanding, but Jackie, I've been talking to a version of you that is barely present. That's not fair, isn't it? The apartment parking garage, the elevator, the door, inside, in the kitchen, in the sharp overhead light that showed everything without mercy, we said the rest of it. The things that had been accumulating in the silence between us, his feeling that I was keeping something from him. And he was right, I was. Though I wasn't ready to say what. My feeling that he had stopped truly seeing me several months ago, and he denied it then, didn't then, said it wasn't that. It was that he was terrified the project would fail and he hadn't known how to say it. We said unkind things. The specific cruelty of intimacy is that you know exactly where to press. I said that he treated his firm the way he should treat his marriage. He said that I processed my feelings the way I processed legal briefs and that he wasn't a case to be closed. Those were the worst of them. There were others. And then there was silence. The specific silence that comes after words have done damage, when both people are standing in the rubble of what was said and neither knows how to start clearing it. I need to sleep, Jackie said finally. Fine. Quick pause here. If you want to watch our videos early with zero ads or get access to exclusive videos, our Patreon has you covered. Link in the description. Alright, back to where things get interesting. He went to the bedroom. I stayed in the kitchen until I heard the light go off, and then I slept on the couch and told myself it was because I didn't want to disturb him. Not because I was afraid that lying beside him in the dark after all of that would finally make me cry in the specific way that means something has gone seriously wrong. In the morning, he was gone before I woke. He'd taken some clothes. He did not leave a note. He called from his office at noon and said very carefully that he thought he needed a few days, that he was going to stay with his colleague for a bit. That he wasn't. And his voice went complicated here. He wasn't going anywhere. He just needed to think. I said okay. Because what else do you say when the thing you're most afraid of is already in motion and stopping it requires a courage you can't find in the moment? He had been gone for 3 weeks. We'd texted carefully. We'd spoken twice, briefly, civilly. Neither conversation had touched the things that needed touching. And I had told myself every day that this would resolve itself, that we would find our way back, that this was not the end. And then I'd open a file with both our names on it and the nausea had hid. And here I was, sitting alone in a rain-soaked office at 7:30 on a Friday night, holding the paper confirmation that Jackie Kern had apparently decided this was the end. Except 31 days. The number sat in my chest alongside everything else, adding its own particular weight to the pile. I locked the Kern file in my bottom desk drawer, not with any specific professional reasoning. It would need to be reassigned to another attorney in the morning, for obvious reasons, and I made a mental note to do exactly that. I locked it because I couldn't look at it anymore tonight. I gathered my coat and my bag. I turned off the lamp. I stood for a moment in the dark rain-silver office and breathed, and then I went out into the rain and walked 4 blocks to the late-night pharmacy on the corner of a street I'd walked down 100 times without ever once anticipating why I'd remember it. The pharmacist who rang me up did not look at me with any expression beyond efficient neutrality. I was grateful for this. I bought 3 different brands, because the kind of certainty I needed tonight was not the kind you got from a single data point. My apartment was dark when I got home. It had been dark when I got home every night for 3 weeks, and I had told myself I was fine with it, and I had been more or less fine with it. And tonight I was not fine with it at all. Tonight the darkness of it felt different. Heavier, charged with something that was almost anticipatory, as though the apartment itself was waiting to see what happened next. I went to the bathroom. I read instructions I did not need to read because I had explained the process to anxious clients before, had included it in the intake packets I gave Omega clients going through bonded dissolutions who worried about timing and biology. I knew what to do. I did it. I set the first one on the counter. I sat on the edge of the bathtub and waited. 3 minutes. It is simultaneously the longest and shortest amount of time. Long enough that your mind goes places it should not go. Short enough that you cannot actually do anything useful while you are waiting. I stared at the tile. I counted grout lines. I thought about a case from 2 years ago. A woman who had sat across from me and said, "I keep waiting for it to feel like a decision I made, rather than a decision that was made for me." And I had written it in my notes because it was the most precise description I'd ever heard of a particular kind of grief. The timer on my phone went off. I looked at the counter. 2 lines. Very clearly, very definitely, 2 lines. I did the second test. I waited. 2 lines. Third. 2 lines. I sat back down on the edge of the bathtub with 3 positive pregnancy tests lined up on my bathroom counter and the sound of rain on the window, and the specific enormous silence of an apartment that should have had another person in it but didn't. I was pregnant. I was 31 days along pregnant, bonded to an alpha who had filed dissolution papers that were currently locked in a drawer at my office. And I was sitting on a bathtub in the dark, trying to decide what I felt, and what I felt was so large and so layered and so contradictory that the only word that honestly covered it was everything. I felt everything. I pressed my hands flat against my stomach, a gesture I had seen pregnant people make in the hallway outside my office in the grocery store in the parks in autumn, a gesture I had registered without imagining it for myself. And I pressed gently and tried to connect the abstract fact of what 3 plastic sticks had told me to the reality of what it meant, what it changed, what it made necessary. And I thought about Jackie. I thought about Jackie the way you think about someone who is the reference point for every significant thing that has happened in your life for the past 2 years. Automatically, the way your eyes go to the brightest point in a room. I thought about him and the way he'd kissed me in the rain once just because he felt like it, and the way he'd argued with the project manager at Callaway on the phone from our kitchen and then apologized to me for disrupting my Saturday with his volume, and the way he'd read to me from whatever he was reading when I was down with a bad cold and couldn't look at a screen, and the way he'd stood at the altar, our small, personal altar, and looked at me like the whole rest of the room had simply stopped mattering. I thought about him saying, "I don't know how to reach you right now." I thought about him staying somewhere else for 3 weeks. I thought about his name on a dissolution file. And I thought, he doesn't know. He doesn't know that I was sitting with a question I should have shared with him, about children, about my body, about our future. He doesn't know that I had been quiet not because I was pulling away, but because I was trying to find the right way to open a door I'd been afraid of opening. He doesn't know that every night for 3 weeks I've reached for my phone to call him and put it down again, because I didn't know how to be the one to cross the distance his leaving had put between us. And I thought, I have to tell him. Not because the pregnancy changed the power of a dissolution. Not because an Omega carrying a pregnancy was legally entitled to pause proceedings. That was a conversation for a different moment and a different kind of lawyer. But because Jackie was my husband, and he did not know the full truth of what had been happening between us. And the least I owed him, was honesty before anything was finalized. I got off the bathtub. I washed my face. I looked at myself in the mirror for a moment, same face, same eyes. The same Santos Tyler who had walked into this bathroom 10 minutes ago and left with a different configuration of the world. And I said out loud quietly to myself, "Okay, you have to go." Jackie was staying at the apartment of a colleague named Soren, a fellow architect who had apparently offered a room without question. I knew the building. I had been there once for a firm event, and I still had the address in my phone from when I'd needed to message the host directions. It was close to 9 by the time I got in my car. The rain had begun to thin, not stopped, just loosened its grip on the evening into something more intermittent. A light mist that blurred the streetlights and made the road look like a painting of itself. I drove. I did not rehearse what I was going to say. Every time I tried to build a sentence, it fell apart before it was finished, because the situation had too many components and any sentence I started from was incomplete without acknowledging the others. So I stopped trying to rehearse and just drove and let my hands on the wheel be the only thing I focused on, and trusted that when I got there, when I was in the same room as Jackie Kern for the first time in 3 weeks, the right words would exist somewhere. They would have to. The building had a buzzer system. I stood in the intermittent mist outside the front entrance and pressed Soren Holt's button because it was 9 in the evening and knocking seemed insufficient. There was a pause. Then Soren's voice, tinny through the speaker. "Yeah? It's Santos Tyler. I'm looking for Jackie." Another pause, longer this time, and I had the distinct impression of a conversation happening on the other side of the speaker before Soren came back and said, "Coming down." Not Jackie's voice. Soren, which meant Jackie was not sure he wanted me up. I waited. 40 seconds that lasted considerably longer, and then the glass door opened and Soren appeared. Tall and sandy-haired and wearing the particular expression of someone who is trying to be neutral and failing slightly. He held the door open. "He's in 4B, he said. "I'll take a walk." "Thank you," I said. He nodded and slipped past me into the mist, and I went inside and took the elevator to the 4th floor. The hall was quiet. The carpet was the color of old moss. 4B was 3 doors down from the elevator, and I stood in front of it for one long breath before I knocked. The silence on the other side lasted long enough that I thought he might not answer, and then the door opened. Jackie Kern in the hallway light of a borrowed apartment, wearing a shirt I recognized and dark pants, with the particular look of a person who has been either working or not sleeping or both. He looked at me, and the air between us changed the way air changes when something long held finally releases pressure. "Santos," he said. His voice was careful. "I need to talk to you," I said. "Please." He stepped back. I came in. The apartment was neat, minimalist. Not his. The fingerprints of his presence visible only in the jacket hung over the back of a chair and the architecture magazines stacked on the coffee table with that particular possessive precision he brought to everything he read. He gestured toward the sitting area and we sat, him in the chair, me on the couch, a coffee table between us like a negotiating table in a room that was neither of ours. I found the file tonight, I said. I had decided on the drive to start there. To start with the fact, at the office, it came in as a new intake. It ended up on my desk. Something moved across his face. Santos, let me finish, please. I waited until he nodded. I sat with it for a while, and then I got sick, not metaphorically, physically, I paused, collected, and I need to tell you something that I should have told you a long time ago, and I need you to understand that I'm not telling you now because of the paperwork. I'm telling you now because I have been dishonest with you through omission, and I can't let that stand any longer regardless of what happens with the paperwork. He was very still, the way he went still when he was giving something his complete attention. 6 months ago, I said, my doctor mentioned that my long-term suppressant protocol needed to be reviewed because of some markers in my blood work. The conversation she was leading toward was about whether I wanted children, whether I wanted to make a different choice about my biology while that was still a straightforward option. His expression shifted. Barely, but I knew it. I didn't tell you, I said. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment. But the truth is I was scared. Not of the answer. I think I'd known the answer for a while. I was scared of saying it out loud to you because saying it out loud meant we had to actually decide together. And what if we decided differently, and I didn't know how to hold that possibility? Santos, I'm not finished. My voice was steady. I was proud of it, in the abstract, the way you notice things working correctly when you expected them to fail. I spent 2 months holding that question alone, and during those 2 months I started becoming someone who was keeping things from you. Not lying, but not sharing, which is its own kind of distance. And I think that's what you were feeling. That glass wall. That's what was behind it. The room was very quiet. And tonight, I said, when the nausea hit, I sat there in the office with my hands on the desk and I counted backward and I thought, I should have told you. Jackie's jaw worked once. Santos, what are you telling me? I'm telling you that I'm pregnant. The words came out steadily, and then the steadiness wavered, just at the edges, just enough that I heard it, the hairline crack in the composure I had been holding together all evening. I found out tonight. 3 tests. I'm telling you because it is the truth and you deserve the truth, and I want to be very clear that I am not telling you to change what you decide about the paperwork. That decision belongs to you, but I needed to say the things I should have said months ago, and I needed you to know this, and I needed to do all of it before another day passed. Jackie stood up from his chair. He crossed the coffee table. Not dramatically, just quickly, the efficient movement of a man who has decided something, and he sat down on the couch beside me and he took my hands in both of his. And for a moment he just held them, and I felt the warmth of his skin against mine, and the way my body recognized him. The specific grain of his warmth that was different from anyone else's. I'm going to tell you something, he said, very quietly. And then I'm going to apologize, and I need you to let me actually apologize, not have you deflect it. Can you do that? I looked at him. Yes. Aston. I filed that paperwork, he said, because I thought you were pulling away from me and I didn't know how to say I was terrified. So instead I did the idiotic, self-destructive thing and made it real before you could. Because I genuinely believed that if I acted like I could survive it, that it would hurt less when it happened. He paused. Soren called me an idiot, for the record. More than once. Soren sounds wise. Soren is, actually. His hands tightened around mine. And I was wrong, Santos. Not just wrong about the paperwork. Wrong about the distance. Wrong that it was you pulling away, rather than both of us failing to reach. I was in the Callaway project up to my eyeballs and terrified it would fail. And instead of telling you that, I started protecting myself from you preemptively, which is the single stupidest thing I have ever done. And I have done some spectacularly stupid things. You haven't. I have. Ask Soren. He looked at me and his eyes were doing the thing they did when he was not performing anything. When every controlled layer was simply gone and what was underneath was this direct and a little raw and wholly entirely him. I am sorry. For the distance. For not telling you I was struggling. for making you feel like you were talking to glass, and for filing paperwork that I filed out of fear, not out of want, because I have never once wanted to leave you. Not for one day of any of this. My throat was very full. I should have told you about the doctor, I said. About what I was thinking about. About the question I was holding. Yes, he said, not gently, truthfully, which was better. You should have, but I understand why you didn't, and I understand it better now than I would have 6 months ago, because I just spent 3 weeks doing the same thing in a different direction. He brought my hands up briefly and pressed his mouth to my knuckles. We are a pair of people who are very good at their respective jobs and very bad at asking each other for help when it matters most. A sound came out of me that was somewhere between a laugh and something I couldn't name. That is an accurate assessment. We should work on it. Probably. He looked at me for a long moment, and in the borrowed light of Soren Holt's apartment, with the rain making its soft sound against the window, he looked like himself, the version of himself I had fallen in love with in increments, the man who drove 4 hours in a thunderstorm, the man who brought the right coffee, the man who held me like I was something worth being precise about. I love you, he said, in case that has been unclear in the recent weeks. Catastrophically, entirely, you specifically. It has been somewhat unclear, I said, and my voice broke on the last word, which I had been holding back all evening and apparently couldn't anymore. Just for the record. I know, I'm sorry. He moved, gathered me in, and I let myself be gathered. Let my forehead fall against his shoulder and my hands grip the front of his shirt, and the whole long, complicated, exhausting evening press itself out of my chest in a series of breaths that were not quite crying but were not far from it either. His arms were around me. His chin was on top of my head. He smelled like cedar and iron, and underneath that, warm and specific and irreplaceable, himself. A baby, he said quietly after a while. His voice had something in it that I could not immediately name, something compressed and enormous. Apparently, I said into his shoulder. How do you feel about that? I thought about it. Sat with the real answer for a moment rather than the easy one. Scared, I said, and more certain than I've been about anything in a while. He was quiet. Then he said, me too. Both things. I lifted my head. His eyes were bright. I reached up and touched his jaw, and he turned his face into my palm the way he always had, instinctive and immediate, and I felt it. The warmth of him, the reality of him, the fact of this man who was mine and who I had nearly lost, not because love had ended, but because two careful private people had each decided the kindest thing was to hold their fears alone. We need to talk, I said, really talk, about everything, the doctor, the question she raised, what I was thinking, what you were going through with Calloway, all of it. Yes, and you need to retract that paperwork, already decided. He didn't hesitate, not for a second. The moment you knocked on the door. Soren came back around 10, with the particular timing of someone who had been looping around the block waiting for what he calculated was a reasonable amount of time. He took one look at us sitting together on his couch and said, "Thank God you were both making me exhausted," and then made tea for all three of us without being asked. And we sat in his living room until nearly midnight, talking the kind of talking that happens when you've been through the compressed pressure of a real thing and come out the other side still intact. Jackie and I went home together. Home. Our apartment? The one with the water pressure issues on the 3rd floor? The one that had been dark and wrong without him in it for 3 weeks and was now lit and warm as we came through the door. And I stood in the front hall and breathed in the particular smell of the space that was ours, coffee and books and the faint cedar of his jackets on the hook, and felt something settle, heavy and right in my chest. He picked up his coat from Soren's bag. He grabbed a few things on the way out and hung it beside mine on the hook. His key went back on the key dish by the door, where it had a specific groove it had always lived in. Small things. The small things are what a home is made of. In the kitchen, he put water on for tea, and I leaned against the counter the way I always did, and in the particular quiet of our own space in the middle of the night, we began the conversation we should have had months ago. Not all at once. It is not the kind of conversation that happens all at once, but piece by piece. The way you dismantle a wall you have built by accident, brick by careful brick. I told him about the doctor's appointment, about the blood work markers, About the endocrine question, I told him what I'd been thinking, turning over afraid to voice, that I wanted to be a parent, that I had wanted it for longer than I'd admitted to myself, that the fear of saying so was partly professional, an omega pregnancy at a firm where I was still establishing myself, and partly something older and harder to name, something about wanting and being afraid that wanting something loudly is the fastest way to lose it. He listened, the way Jackie always listened when he was giving something his full self, completely still, eyes steady, all the architectural precision of his attention aimed at you. And then he told me about Calloway, the real version, the one underneath the professional face he'd worn about it, the commission that had come at a perfect time right after our first year of marriage, and how he'd taken it not just for the career, but because some part of him had felt the responsibility of us in a new way, the responsibility of being someone's person, someone's alpha, someone's bond, and feeling like he needed to be worthy of that in concrete terms, in professional achievement, in the building of something that would last, and how that pressure had quietly eaten him from the inside, until the project that was supposed to be an expression of his love for what he did became instead a weight he couldn't set down. You never had to earn it, I said when he was done. You had it from the beginning. I know that, he said. I know it here. He touched his chest. But here, he touched his chest. But here, he touched his temple. Here I had to relearn it a few times. I understand that, I said, more than I want to admit. The tea went cold while we talked. We made more. We moved from the kitchen to the couch and the couch to the bed, eventually lying in the dark with our voices low and the city making its quiet nighttime sounds outside the window. And we talked until we ran out of things to say and then lay in the silence that was a different silence, full rather than empty, inhabited rather than hollow. I need to call my doctor, I said into the dark. Monday. I'll come with you. You don't have to. Santos. His voice was dry. I'm coming with you. I smiled at the ceiling. Okay. He found my hand, our fingers interlaced, easy and automatic, the way they always had. We're going to be okay, he said. Not as a reassurance, exactly, more as the statement of a fact he'd assessed carefully and concluded was structurally sound. We are, I said. But we have to keep talking. No more holding things alone because we can't find the right moment. Agreed. He squeezed my hand. The right moment is whenever the thing needs to be said. That's an unreasonably simple solution. I'm an architect. I believe in structural simplicity. I laughed then, a real one, from the chest, the way laughs are when you've been through something and come out the other side still able to find things funny. He laughed too, and the sound of it in the dark of our bedroom, in our apartment, was the most ordinary and extraordinary thing in the world. Monday morning, Mara found me at my desk before anyone else arrived, with the Kern file already pulled from the bottom drawer and sitting on top of the stack. About this, I said when she appeared in the doorway. She looked at the file. She looked at me. Mara had been a paralegal for 11 years and possessed the particular perceptiveness of someone who has seen every variation of human complication that passes through a family law office. Oh, she said, I need you to reassign it, I said. And there may be a retraction filing coming in from Mr. Kern's side today or tomorrow. When it does, please make sure it goes through cleanly. She picked up the file. She looked at me for one more second and her expression did something small and warm. Sure, Santos, she said. That was all. That was enough. At 9 o'clock, I had a call from Jackie. He was calling from Meridian Design between a project meeting and a site visit, and his voice had the particular energy of someone who has cleared something heavy from their chest and is moving lighter now. Retractions filed, he said. My attorney just confirmed. Good, I said. How are you feeling? A little nauseous, I said. Which is apparently going to be a feature for a while. I've been reading about that, he said. Have you? You'd be surprised how much reading you can do at 5 in the morning. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the ceiling and felt something that was warm and complicated and deeply, thoroughly mine. You read at 5 in the morning? I couldn't sleep. There was a lot to think about. A pause, and in it I heard him smiling. We have an appointment Thursday at 11. Dr. Mira's practice. I'll be there at 10:30. You don't need to be there at 10:30. Santos. Fine, 10:30. After the call, I turned to my window for a moment and watched the city going about its morning business, the traffic moving, the trees that line the street doing their small, quiet work in the early light. Everything proceeding with the ordinary momentum that the world maintains regardless of what any particular life inside it is doing. I thought about the file that was no longer on my desk. I thought about the 3 tests lined up on my bathroom counter, which I had put in the bin last night, but whose reality had taken up residence in my body in a way that was already beginning to feel less like shock and more like fact. I thought about Jackie at 5 in the morning with his phone, reading about nausea and trimesters and whatever else the internet had offered him in the dark hours between our conversation and the morning. I thought about Renata, his sister, who had whispered in my ear at our wedding, "Don't let him forget how to be soft." I had forgotten, in the middle of the hard months, to remember that softness was a choice both of us had to keep making, not a permanent condition, but an active one, a decision you renew, the way you keep watering a plant even when you can't see it growing, because you know the growth is happening regardless. I opened my calendar and blocked Thursday morning. Then I pulled the next file from my stack, a new intake, someone I'd never met, a couple at the end of something, and I opened it and picked up my pen and began. Weeks passed. They passed the way weeks do when your life has returned to its proper axis, with the ordinary texture of things, the rhythm of work and home, and all the small domestic facts that make up a shared life, which are less glamorous and more sustaining than anything else I know. Dr. Mira on Thursday was warm and calm and professional, and when Jackie sat beside me in the consultation room and held my hand and asked his list of very precise questions, he had of course made a list, because he was Jackie Kern, and lists were structural. She answered each one with the patient thoroughness of someone who respects people who prepare. On the drive home, he was quiet in his thoughtful way, processing. 8 weeks, he said eventually. About that. So when we were still, he stopped. Recalibrated. It was already happening when everything fell apart. Yes. He was quiet for another stretch. Then, "I want to say something and I need you not to deflect it." "I won't. I'm glad it's happening," he said. "Not because of what it meant for us. I would have come back regardless. I want that to be clear. I would have found my way back regardless. But I'm glad that this is happening, that there's going to be a person who is part of you and part of me, and I want to do it right. I want to do this whole thing right." I looked at him driving, the particular profile of him in the afternoon light, the strong line of his jaw, the hands on the wheel that had learned to hold me like I was something worth being precise about. "We'll do it right," I said. "We're going to make mistakes because that's what parents do and probably what we'll always do, but we'll do it in the direction of right." He reached over and took my hand without looking away from the road. That evening we called a sister. Renata's reaction was, in chronological order, a shriek, several seconds of incomprehensible sound, then the completely audible demand to speak to Jackie immediately so she could tell him to his face that he had better not mess this up. Jackie took the phone and received this message with characteristic dignity, which is to say, he said, "I know Renata," 3 times in a row while she talked, which was apparently the correct response, because she eventually shifted into an extended and enthusiastic discussion of names and plans and what she would teach the child that Jackie absolutely could not be trusted to teach them. "Architecture," Jackie said once he had the phone back. "You'll teach them architecture and she'll teach them everything else," I said. "That's probably fair." Later that night, I was in the kitchen making dinner, something simple, soup from scratch, because the nausea had opinions about smells and I'd found that plain thing settled it. And Jackie came and stood beside me at the counter and did not try to help but simply stood there present, the warm solidity of him within arm's reach. And I thought about how this was the thing you didn't tell people about when you talked about love. Not the grand moments, not the first kiss, or the wedding, or the declaration in the kitchen, though those were real and lasting and beautiful in their own right. But this, the standing beside, the being there without needing it to be anything more than that. "Talk to me," I said, stirring the soup. "About what?" "Anything. Calloway. Your day. What you were reading at 5 in the morning." He leaned against the counter beside me. "Calloway is on track. The foundation review came back clean, which means we're 6 weeks ahead of where I thought we'd be at this point, which means I will be able to be present in the ways that matter for the next," he calculated, "foreseeable significant period of time." I smiled at the soup. That's good. At 5 in the morning, he continued, I was reading about what the first trimester is like from the perspective of the omega carrying. And also, I'll admit, several strongly worded forums about what partners should and should not do, which ranged from extremely specific to completely contradictory. What was the consensus? Pay attention. Show up. Ask what is needed rather than assuming. A beat. So I'm asking, what's needed? I looked at him then. He was watching me with those steady dark eyes that had, at our first meeting, seemed so guarded and now seemed simply direct, the guard having dissolved incrementally over years until this was what was underneath. Attentive, specific. This, I said. What you're doing right now. Soup. Your voice. Just being here. He nodded once. That I can do. There is a letter I wrote in the second week of our separation, in the middle of one of those 4 in the morning hours when sleep has given up on you and you are alone with your thoughts, in a way that is sometimes clarifying and sometimes just painful. I wrote it and I never sent it. It is still in a file on my laptop under a name that is just a date. It said, Jackie, I don't know how to start a letter to you because the version of you I know best is the one across the table, the one beside me in the kitchen, the one whose silences I can read the way I read case files, carefully with attention to what is between the stated facts as much as what is on the surface. Writing to you is less accurate than being in the same room with you, and the distance between us right now is, in part, about not being in the same room. I have been thinking about the night we argued, and I keep coming back to the thing you said, that I process my feelings the way I process legal briefs. I was angry when you said it. I've been angry at it for days. But there is something in it that I can't entirely deny, which is that I do have a tendency to handle difficult things with a kind of procedural distance, a professional remove, that is useful in courtrooms and terrible in kitchens. What I was keeping from you was not an absence of feeling. It was an excess of it, too much feeling with not enough structure to hold it, and so I held it alone because I didn't have the right words yet, and I kept waiting for the right words. And in the waiting, I became exactly the unreachable thing you were describing. I love you. That has not wavered. Not once, not in any of the hard weeks, not in the argument. If you are reading this, it means I finally found my way to saying the rest out loud, which means the letter was worth writing even if I never send it. Come home. I still have the letter. I read it sometimes not because I need to. Things are different now, better, more honest, structurally sound in the way that things are when you have actually gotten into the walls and looked at the damage instead of repainting over it, but because it is useful to remember who you were in the dark hours, not with shame, just with the recognition that the person who writes at 4 in the morning and the person who functions at 9 in the morning are both true versions, and the one who is afraid and inarticulate and desperately wants to say come home deserves as much tending as the one who wears the professional composure like a well-fitted coat. Jackie found the letter eventually, not because I showed him. I hadn't exactly hidden it, but I hadn't offered it either. He was using my laptop to look something up, a document he'd left in my cloud that he needed quickly, and the file was visible in the recent documents, and he asked. I said he could read it. He read it at the kitchen table while I made coffee, and I watched him without watching him. The way you watch someone who is reading something that came from the most private room in you. When he finished, he set the laptop down. He sat for a moment. Come home, he repeated. Very quiet. You did, I said. Yes. He looked up at me. I did. There was nothing else to say, so I finished making the coffee and brought him a cup, and he pulled me into his lap in the kitchen chair like he always did when he didn't want there to be any space between us, and I let him. And outside the window, the city went about its ordinary morning, and inside our apartment, things were quiet and full and exactly right. 6 months later, on a morning that was neither remarkable nor unremarkable, just a morning, with good light and a city making its noises and the kettle going on the stove, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and the particular changed relationship with time that the third trimester brings. Everything slower and more deliberate, the body reclaiming authority from the schedule. Jackie was in his office at the far end of the apartment. I could hear the low murmur of a project call, his voice precise and calm, the architect's version of his courtroom voice, the one that means the structure is sound, that the calculations hold, that what is being built will stand. My own files were in my bag by the door, already organized for the day. I was working reduced hours now by choice, a choice that had required precisely 2 conversations, one with my supervising partner and one with myself, neither as difficult as I had feared, and the balance of it felt like something that had been slightly off-kilter for years finally finding its level. I thought about the file, occasionally. The blue-tabbed file that had sat on my desk that rainy Friday evening, that had been reassigned and eventually, with the retraction cleanly processed, had been closed and archived. I thought about the nausea that had hit in the same breath as the discovery, my body announcing its own news in the middle of someone else's paperwork. I thought about how close it had been, not in a way that produced fear. We were past fear, Jackie and I, or at least past the specific fear of losing each other to silence. We had made commitments after everything that were different from our wedding vows, quieter, more specific, built out of the wreckage of what almost happened rather than the optimism of what we hoped. We had committed to talking, to asking, to not holding the things that needed sharing until they compressed into walls. Some days we were better at it than others. That, too, is a thing no one tells you. That communication is not a skill you acquire and then possess permanently, but a practice like any practice. That requires maintenance and renewal, and the occasional acknowledgement that you've let it slip. But we were trying, both of us, with the same care and stubbornness that characterized most of the things we did when we decided they mattered. The call in the other room ended. Footsteps, and then Jackie appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed for the day, tie loosened in the way he always had it before he actually needed to leave. He looked at me at the table. "How are you feeling?" The daily question. He asked it every morning and I answered it honestly, and this small ritual was, I had decided, one of the best things in my life. Like a person who is strongly considering going back to bed, I said. Also, the baby kicked Mira's position again. I think she's going to be difficult. "She'll be interesting," he said, crossing the kitchen. He paused behind my chair and dropped a kiss to the top of my head. Automatic, unhurried, his hands resting briefly on my shoulders. "There's a difference." Spoken by someone who does not have to carry interesting at 32 weeks. Spoken by someone who takes it very seriously that interesting people have to come from somewhere. He came around and crouched down to be at my level, his hands on the arms of the chair, his face level with mine. And his expression was the one I had come to think of as purely his, that specific combination of dry humor and complete seriousness, and something underneath both of them that was warm and particular and entirely mine. "Can I make you toast before I go?" "Yes." "2 slices?" "2 slices." He stood and went to the bread box and I watched him, this man, this alpha, this person who had filed dissolution paperwork and then come back, who had read fertility forums at 5 in the morning and made lists of questions for the doctor and taught himself over months of genuine effort to say the things he was afraid of before they became walls. I watched him, and I thought about the title of the file I had never sent. Just a date. The date of the darkest week. The week when I'd been most alone in it, and I thought about how sometimes the darkest weeks are not the end of the story, but the compressed center of it. The part that, once you're past it, explains everything about the shape of what you're building. The toast popped. Jackie set both slices on the plate with the small care he brought to things he decided mattered, and brought it to the table and set it in front of me and sat across from me with his own coffee. And we sat in the morning light of our kitchen. The 2 of us and the quietly imminent third. And the city was outside making all its necessary sounds, and inside, everything was quiet and warm and for now. Exactly enough. "When is Renata arriving?" I asked. "Thursday." "That gives us 2 days. Enough time to have the apartment not look like a construction staging area. The crib is not assembled." "I will assemble the crib tonight." "You said that last week." "I meant it last week and I mean it this week." I looked at him. He looked at me. The corner of his mouth moved. I ate my toast. "This is a love story. Not the clean kind. Not the kind that runs smoothly from opening to resolution without the detours into the difficult and the unsaid. It is the kind of love story where 2 people who are good at their separate competencies manage, through pride and fear and silence, to build a distance between them that only honesty can close. We closed it. We were not finished closing it. Every day we were still closing it, piece by piece, choosing the conversation over the wall, choosing the ask over the assumption. It was harder than either of us had expected, and worth it in a way that neither of us had words sufficient for, which was fine, because we had time and we had each other, and we had a crib that needed assembling by Thursday. Santos Tyler. Omega. Divorce lawyer. Husband. 32 weeks and counting. The file on my desk was someone else's, as it should be, and the one that had briefly been mine was closed, not in the way endings are closed, but in the way beginnings are, carefully, with intention, and with the full understanding that what came next required all of it. Every word, every silence finally broken, every morning with toast and good light and the man across the table who looked at me like the whole rest of the room had simply stopped mattering. That was enough. That was everything. If you made it to the end, you're my kind of person. Leave a subscribe, comment down your favorite part of the story, and if you want early access to videos, exclusive content, or just want to support the channel, hit that join button right below the video. Even one member genuinely means the world to me. See you in the next one.